First off, I'm Rainey Martin-Galiakovich. I'm the program director at the Center for Positive Leadership. And just a few housekeeping things. Food in here, coffee, if you didn't see it already in the other room. Bathrooms, or the women's bathroom is in this hallway, and then you have to go to the other hallway for the men's bathroom, just so you know. What else? Any other housekeeping things? No? Okay. So welcome. I'm glad to see everybody, and we are here today to hear Kristen Lucas talk about dignity, affirming, respect. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Kristen and let her take it away. It's going to be very interactive today. So Kristen Lucas is an associate professor in management and entrepreneurship department in the College of Business. Her research expertise centers on how communication from micro-level interactions to broader social disclosures affirms and denies human dignity in the workplace. She has published in such outlets as Journal of Management Studies, Journal of Business Ethics, Organization Studies, Group and Organization Management, and Management Communication Quarterly. Additionally, Kristen teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in organizational behavior, crisis management, and business communications. She also facilitates management workshops, provides communication, consulting, and training, and delivers talks to industry groups on how to handle difficult workplace encounters with more dignity. She earned her MA and PhD in organizational communication from Purdue. I will not hold that against you. Oh. Yeah, that was my year. So, anyway, welcome, Kristen, and thank you.
Good morning. I am so glad to be spending the morning with you today, and so glad that you made it out into the chilly weather to come here to spend the morning with this topic. So, like Rami said, I want this to be interactive. So before I talk about anything or click on any of my slides, I would like us to start talking about, with each other, a couple questions. When it comes to corrective feedback, how does that make you feel when you know you are getting it as a receiver? And how does it make you feel when you are the leader who has to deliver that? So let's just start buzzing at our tables about how the prospect of feedback makes us feel. Okay, so let's gather back together. So can we do some sharing with the group? What were some of the dominant themes that you heard about receiving feedback?
It's difficult.
Difficult to hear that negative feedback? At times, okay. What else?
It feel hurtful.
Okay, hurtful.
It depends on the trust that you have with the other person.
Okay, good.
We actually got in a pretty deep conversation about when it has different, like when you seek it, it's different than when somebody gives it to you unsolicited. The culture of the place, the intention of the giver, like all these things just change how you feel about it, whether you're the receiver or the giver.
Right, okay. Good. What about being the giver? How do you feel about giving corrective feedback?
There was the word dread shared.
Oh, dread. That's a good one.
It depends on the person and personality.
Okay. Yeah, because if there's somebody who's seeking it or you think they're open to it, maybe there's a little less dread. Okay. Anything else besides dread?
One of our themes was just a little bit about the difference in when you are less experienced with it versus when you have more reps, if you will.
Right, right. Yes, and Anne.
We mentioned that there's sort of a feeling of ethical, or even if you don't want to give it, there's a feeling that it's the right thing to do. And
Okay,
so
good.
You gotta step up and bite the bullet.
Okay,
Have the conversation.
good. But what I've noticed of all of these things is nobody has been really excited about it, right? I'm not hearing like, oh, I love getting it, I love giving it. And one of the things that we know is that leaders can really struggle with delivering corrective feedback, in part because of this relationship of understanding that receiving it doesn't always feel good. It can hurt, or it can feel insulting sometimes to get that. And then as a leader, you're thinking, oh, I don't want to hurt somebody. I don't want to insult them. Now I dread it. Maybe I don't have enough reps, right? Or maybe I'm concerned about how the person will react. And so sometimes what ends up happening is you end up with one of these destructive types of feedback. And perhaps we've all run into one of these leaders at some point in our lives. The hothead. This would be a good example, would be one of my first bosses, worked in a restaurant, and he just loved to yell at people until the veins bulged out of the top of his head, and he would turn bright red and spit would fly from his mouth, and that's how you knew that you had done something wrong, right? And some people will let things fester until they snap, right? There's some people who say, well, maybe if I just turn it into a joke, it'll be okay. I'll just tease them about something and then they'll know. Then they'll get my message and whatever the issue will be corrected. Oh, see, you're late again. Oh, did your car break down? Right? So you can have that. You can have somebody who's kind of passive aggressive. The person who maybe is two-faced. No, there's no problem at all. And then when you turn around, they're complaining to somebody else that there's a problem and they just don't want to deal with it. And of course, there's the ostrich, the person who just says, if I don't say anything, the problem is going to correct itself on its own. But what we know is oftentimes the problem doesn't correct itself on its own, right? And we end up in this cycle where things are not going as well as they could possibly go. And it's because there's this dreaded task in front of people that they have to deliver feedback, and they don't know how to do it in a way that is affirming their dignity. So what do? We have advice, right? And the advice that you see again and again is, it's easy. All you have to do is give people a compliment sandwich. And we all know what that is, right? I'm going to give you a compliment, then I'm going to tell you what I think is wrong, and then I'm going to end with a compliment. And sometimes, depending on how long the problem has festered or how severe the problem is, or what your relationship with the individual is, sometimes that bread is pretty thin and stale, right? Oh, I just love that shirt that you're wearing today. But I need to talk about your performance. By the way, is that a new hairdo, right? But hopefully they're a little bit task related, but they can be, they can sound just as much baloney as that. And why? What are the problems with a compliment sandwich? Do you know? Like everybody says, well, not everybody, but a lot of people say compliment sandwich. So why do we say, here's a question first. Why do you think people say compliment sandwich is the way to go?
Afraid to just say the truth.
Yeah, afraid to say the truth.
So they'll be more receptive.
Yeah, people will be more receptive. Mm-hmm.
They're trying to be friendly.
Yeah, they're trying to be friendly. They're trying to be nice. They're trying to let people know, I still care about you, so let me give you a compliment, right? But it kind of backfires because there's some things that happens. One, the feedback becomes unnecessarily time-consuming. So instead of talking to somebody about why they're late, you're spending time thinking up compliments and delivering those compliments. So you're spending more time on the feedback than you need to. Another problem with these is that they can be seen as insincere and patronizing, right? And so some people will see right through it and they will say, if the issue is my performance on this task and you're just giving me these hollow compliments, you don't really mean it. And that has negative consequences in two ways. One, they can just feel genuinely patronized and talked down to and condescending. That's one way. But another way is if down the road you actually want to give them a compliment, then they're not going to believe your compliment because they're not going to trust you. They're going to be like, I know what this is. When's the insult coming? Here's the third thing, and perhaps one of the biggest issues of the compliment sandwich is that the primacy and recency effect, right? People remember best what they hear first and what they hear last. And if you're sitting down and you have 3 pieces of feedback to go over with somebody, somebody could say, well, there were 3 things. They thought that I was doing really well on this task, and they thought I was doing, and there was something in the middle I can't remember, right? Or they can look at the overall balance and say the overall balance is I'm doing really well, yeah, I need to improve this thing a little bit, but that's it, right? So you could actually be undermining your efforts. So you build up all of this courage to do this dreaded task, and the person goes, yeah, they basically like my performance, right? So very, very problematic. And that's why I like to think about the compliment sandwich as being pure baloney. And there's better ways to do feedback. So let's talk about taking a more dignified approach, because that's really what we're talking about, right? Is when we're talking about wanting to be nice to people and respect them and not be hurtful, we're talking about how do we uphold their dignity. So I want to turn to a couple little examples of research, what research has shown. And so one of the foundations is this broad-based definition of what dignity really means in the workplace. And when you talk to people, and this is what I've done my research on, is interviewing people, focus groups, people from garbage collectors to CEOs and everybody in between, and I'll say, what does dignity mean to you? And it ultimately boils down to self-recognized and other recognized sense of worth that's either affirmed or invalidated in the workplace. And I'm specifically looking at workplace dignity. I'm not looking at a broader human dignity in kind of a more human rights perspective. But there's these very important distinctions here, self-recognized. So people know that they have a sense of worth, so they have their, what some people call their God-given dignity or their inherent dignity, and they want to recognize it in themselves, right? So I feel that I'm worthy. So when they feel ashamed, that's not dignity, right? When they're made to feel less about themselves, that's not dignity. So you want them to feel that in themselves. But they also need to perceive that other people recognize it in themselves, or other people recognize it in them, right? So it is not just enough that I feel like I'm worthy. I need to know that my department chair, Ryan, sees me as worthy, right? And that's all a perception, right? Because I don't know what he really thinks. Now, nobody knows what the other person genuinely thinks, but what we have is their behavior. We have is relationship. We have what we say to one another. And that's how perceptions are built of whether this person sees my worth. But the interesting thing about dignity in the workplace is that there's 2 components. And they're really kind of opposite of each other in the world. So there's this idea of inherent dignity coming from if you want to get philosophical, from a Kantian perspective. Kant would say anything that has a price has no dignity. Only things that are above all price have a dignity, right? So this is the idea of God-given dignity. Nobody can take it away from you. It is inherent to you, and just purely by being a human being who walks through the door or calls in sick and doesn't walk through the door, you are deserving of human dignity. But in the workplace, there's this idea of earned dignity. And again, you talk to anybody and they will say over and over and over again that they feel that they earn dignity, right? They earn and establish their worth in the workplace. And this is these should be contradictory, right? Because if you have a dignity that cannot be earned or bought or paid for, and then you show up at the workplace where you are exchanging your labor for a wage, that you're paying for your talents and you're earning it, that flies in the face of inherent dignity, but they both exist. In practical, real world, they both exist because people want their human dignity recognized, they want their earned dignity recognized, which means they want their competence and their contribution acknowledged in the workplace. They want people to see that what they do is important. And you hear this every time baristas go on strike, right? Every time that there is a disgruntled employee, every time that somebody quits, often you will hear them say, they didn't think I was important. They didn't see that what I did was valuable, right? So what does this mean for corrective feedback? So talk amongst yourselves, like how would these dignity definitions influence what you think about the prospect of giving somebody corrective feedback? I know that's a big theoretical question. I will wander. So what are some connections? What are some connections we see between the prospect of delivering corrective feedback and this idea of dignity?
Say the question one more time.
So what is the connection between like these underlying principles of dignity and the prospect of delivering corrective feedback? There's many right answers here.
I think part of it is how much surround you've been giving all along. Like the culture, is it a culture of dignity? And
Yes.
we talked about how if you have the greatest, most perfect comment and feedback, but it's in an environment where there's a lot of hurt. The person has no self-esteem, like they don't know that you trust
Right.
and love them.
Right.
It's not going to work.
Right. And I'm going to flip this upside down, and I believe 100% of this. I remember interviewing somebody in Italy because I was doing a cross-cultural study, and I love that he said even the opposite. He said, respect is here and dignity is here. And he said, and if you know that you have dignity, you can have disrespect because you know you have dignity.
Yeah. Like that.
What else? What other connections?
I just think, understanding, how it affects dignity and self-worth, makes how you deliver corrective feedback all the more important.
Right.
There's a lot at stake.
Right. Yeah, a lot at stake, because if you're telling somebody, correcting them, telling them that they're doing something wrong, it can impact what they think that you see in them. It can impact what they see in themselves. Anything else?
One of the examples at our table was the idea of criticizing the person versus criticizing the action or behavior.
Right. Right.
Sort of, intentionally just shutting the person down.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So really kind of being careful with how that's delivered. So you're talking about, just like with children, right? You're not a bad kid. It's just a bad behavior, right? Yeah, and another thing that we can think about here is not just what are the risks that are entailed, but what are the opportunities that are entailed? Because what people ultimately want is to establish extra worth beyond just their humanity that is recognized by themselves and by others. So if you are withholding feedback, you are withholding an opportunity for them to gain competence, for them to make a bigger contribution. And so I have seen and witnessed in organizations where somebody has done something wrong, or maybe not to a standard that a boss has wanted. And then instead of telling that person and giving that person a chance to correct it, they withhold that feedback. And then the behavior gets repeated, and then the boss gets more upset. Right? And then a little bit later on, other people are seeing this person as incompetent. And then down the road, you're having a conversation with them about maybe it's time for them to look for another position. Instead of head on saying, here's a way that you can do a better job. And you're doing a better job because I care about you, because I know you want to be competent and make contributions. And I'm equipping you with feedback to allow you to do that at a level that I'm going to recognize it, you're going to see it in yourself, other people in the organization are going to see the competence and contribution that you bring to this organization. So if you think about it in that way, giving corrective feedback is the kindest, most wonderful gift that you can give somebody. just as long as you don't do it in a way that tears them down, right, as you are giving it. So, what we're going to be doing today is a role play, but before we get into the role play, one of the things I think is really important is this idea of what we call starting with a dignity pledge. Because what I heard you all say is, I know corrective feedback can be harmful to the person receiving it, or it can at least hurt, even if it's from a good place. And I dread doing that. And one of the reasons, and I heard a couple of people talk about this as I walked around the room, is this idea is, I don't want to be the mean person. I don't want to be the person who's inflicting the harm. Like, I don't want to be the person who is seen as being rude or a nitpicker or anything like that. And so there is a possibility that, one, you feel bad about yourself being the person who has to deliver negative feedback. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that when you're in this zone of like, I feel bad or I feel like I'm a bad person because I'm doing this, it can actually elevate your defensiveness. And so then you're coming into a conversation with more defensiveness. And if tables get turned and maybe an employee lashes out and you're in defensive mode, then you go on the defensive. And so it's really important, I think, before we begin to anchor ourselves in a dignity pledge. And so I've provided one, if you look in your pack, on page 5. And you could have it say anything you want it to say. But I just wrote one up here, just kind of spun one off. So you would raise your hand and say, I'm a leader who is committed to promoting and protecting the dignity of every individual I lead. Right? And so you remind yourself that before that conversation. And I recognize and honor their inherent worthiness as human beings who are deserving of respect. And I recognize and honor their instrumental worthiness that they strive to demonstrate through their competence and contributions, not only when they succeed, but also and especially when they may stumble. And if you take that pledge, you are then reminding yourself, I'm doing this because I care. I'm doing this because I care about the organization, and I'm doing this because I care about the individual. Whew, right? That's a big thing, but that can help you anchor yourself, get into the right mindset, and be able to deflect those negative emotions that might be creeping in about your own identity. So you can do it out loud, you can do it silently, but just take a moment here. Let's anchor ourselves before we begin. I'll give you a few more seconds to read through that. All right, so now that you've done that and you've anchored yourself, I could go on with a list of respectful things that you can do, but you could probably shout some of these out, right? What are some ways that you can deliver more respectful feedback? What are some tips and tricks? We already heard one. I talk about the behavior and not the person.
I think some listening has to be
Okay.
part of it, and curiosity.
Yep, listening and curiosity, asking questions.
Timeliness is important.
Timeliness in two ways, right? So doing it quickly, don't let it fester, do it right away in the moment. But also, don't do it at the end of the day. Like, don't wait until the person is leaving because they're going to catch the bus to go home and say, like, hey, do you have 5 minutes so we can do it at the end of the day and I can get out of here. Do it early in the day so there's plenty of time for them to ask questions, right? So we can keep going down with this list of ideas. But what I want to do is give you a deeper framework. And so we're calling it the 5 C's framework. And so we can think about this 5 C's as the steps that you would take to deliver feedback. So the first thing is expressing care for people's dignity. And I'm going to talk a little bit more deeply about each one as we go along, especially this one. And so this care for people's dignity is the idea that you need to express to them that it matters to you. So you talked about the hug a little bit, right? Maybe that's part of, I don't know what happens with your with your proverbial hug, but it's letting people that you care about them in a deep and meaningful way. But here's the catch. One, it has to be genuine. I mean, that's really the catch. And two, it is possible in this world that you don't care in a deep and meaningful way for everybody who you are giving corrective feedback to. So how do you create genuine expressions of care that aren't hollow compliments for somebody who is, maybe the person who is the source of irritation in every single day, right? Here's this person who's constantly screwing up. I don't think that they are a valued member of this organization. I want them to be a valued member of the organization. How do I communicate this? So I have 3 pieces of advice. Piece of advice number 1 is that if you do care about the person, it's really easy to be genuine, right? So Rami, we have worked together for years, and right? And you can talk about, like, I know that you've been a star, like, I know that you're somebody that we've been able to rely on, la, la, la. And I can make it personal, and I can make it about her, and make it really genuine, and then say, and that is why I want to talk to you, because I've noticed a change, and I want to address that. But you can talk about that care very explicitly. Sometimes you're giving corrective feedback to somebody who's brand new, and you don't know them at all. So if that's the case, what you do then is depersonalize, right? So you may just say, it's really, all of our new associates are important to us. And we want everyone to succeed, right? It's just a generic thing. You don't know them, or don't, right? So it's just generic feedback. But you express kind of care in that way. Another way that you can express care when it's somebody who right now is somebody that you're not caring deeply about is you can actually depersonalize it altogether, right? And so you can say things like, and I will use an example from an unfortunate feedback experience that I had with an employee many, many years ago, where it was somebody who was constantly late, and she was causing lots of problems in the organization. And at some point I just said, you may not understand this, but your job is so important, right? So I didn't say you are so important, because at that point I was not feeling the love, and I couldn't genuinely say you are so important to me. But I could genuinely say, you don't realize this, but your job is so important. As the receptionist and the front desk person for this organization, you are the first face that people see when they come and visit us, right? You do this, and you help direct the flow, and you keep things going, and that's what you do, and that's a really important thing, right? So that's another way you can express care. So I care about you, you're a valued member of the team, but you think about something that you can say that's genuine, right, and not an empty compliment. Conduct is very simply the very specific thing, the very specific behavior that people are doing. And one of the things that I always advise people is never to use adverbs or assign intention, right? So you're trying to irritate me by, right? You're guessing what their intention is. Instead, you're just saying, this is the thing that's happening, right? So you're dropping the adverbs, you're dropping the adjectives, you are getting rid of assessments of behavior, and instead, very tangible, verifiable facts. So you were late delivering the TPS reports for the 3rd consecutive month. You watch Office Space, yeah, right? And so this is really specific, right? It's not a generalization, it's not talking about intent, but it's a very specific behavior. The next thing that you have to do is explain the consequences. And so this is the why. Why is this a big deal? Why am I talking to you about the TPS reports? Well, when they're late, it backs up several steps, and it causes problems with payroll. And maybe the person never realized that TPS reports are important, so you might be selling them this idea or explaining the why. The causes is where you get information from the other individual, right? So what's going on here? And here's where you ask the non-threatening, open-ended question, right? What's happening? have you taken steps to correct this? Can you talk to me about this? Sometimes it's more of a behavioral issue than something as straightforward as this. I remember one time talking to somebody and saying, like, okay, gotten some reports that this is the issue, but I want to hear your side of the story, right? So don't assume that you know the whole side. So that's another, what's your side of the story? So what steps have you taken? What's going on? Talk to me about this, right? So something that gets them talking. Because until you know why this is happening, you're not going to be able to solve it. And then in the last step is where you collaborate to reach agreement on what's going to happen, and you reach commitment that that person's going to pursue whatever action that is. And that's why it's not just you laying down the law, but it's saying, like, here's what we're going to do. So we're in agreement that what we're going to do is we're going to actually move up the date for the TPS reports 2 days before we need them done, right? And then you're going to let me know that they are done. If they're not done 48 hours ahead of time, I'm going to have an update, right? And so we're going to build in some additional security until we know we can trust you to deliver on those reports, right? Maybe it's an agreement. Maybe it's even you giving a little bit. So maybe you find out your employee's always late, but it's because of their children's busing schedules. And if you can just flex time them by 15 minutes, they will be on time for all eternity going forward. It's just that particular start time is an issue, right? So sometimes it's you giving a little bit, and it's not just them being lazy, right? So this is the 5 C's model. So now this moves to the role play. This is your chance to try this out. And I have some scenarios here. And the big thing is that you need to have groups of 3. And once you have a group of 3, you're going to get a set of role plays. And you're going to take one paperclip set, but everybody at the table is going to have a slightly different set. In one set, you will be the leader, and one you will be the receiver, and one you will be the evaluator, okay? So I'm going to pass these out. Or do you want to, can you pass these out? 2, 3. As I explain what's going on, so we are going to start with the purple scenario. So take the big paper clip off. Then each person at the table will get one of these mini sets. That's all somebody's with this. That's you. That's you. So everybody should have one, and their first sheet of paper should be purple. Does this make sense? Okay. And it will tell you what you are. So it may say leader, right? So you are going to take out your purple sheet. So the person whose sheet says leader, who are the leaders right now? Raise your hands if you're a purple leader. You should have 2 sheets of paper. What you have is the 5 C's planning guide, where you can jot some notes, or you can use it as a cheat sheet as you ad-lib your feedback all the way down. And you also have a scenario that you are going to read. Now, don't read each other's sheets, and you should only be reading the purple sheets right now. If you are the receiver, you have a half sheet of paper that describes the scenario, and you will read your scenario. If you are an evaluator, then you will have this sheet right here, which is the feedback rating sheet. So what is going to happen is this, is the leader right now is going to figure out what he or she wants to say or needs to say to the receiver to deliver this corrective feedback. So it explains the problem and what's going on. So you're going to figure out what your dignity opener is, and then you're going to, the conduct, the cause, the and then, or the conduct and the consequences of that. You're going to figure out how you're going to try to identify the causes, right? And then after that, you're probably going to have to figure out commitment based on what the other person says. But your job right now is to plan what you're going to say. The receiver, your job is to read the scenario, get an idea of what's going on, and then respond accordingly to however your leader is giving you feedback. So if your leader, this is not going to happen in this room, but if your leader was really mean and abusive, respond accordingly. Maybe call them a jerk. Nobody's going to get called a jerk in this room, so that's not going to happen. But if they did, that's what you would do. If this is something that you would feel like you wouldn't want to talk to them about because they hadn't built your trust up yet, don't talk to them about whatever your issue is, right? But you just get into your role play mode. The evaluator, with your purple evaluation sheet, your job is to be carefully observing the leader delivering feedback to the receiver, so you can give them a little debriefing after it's over. Does this make sense? Then what's going to happen is after we get done with this scenario, we're going to go to the next one. We're going to go to the blue scenario, and you'll have a different role. So ideally, we'll get through a couple of these, Rami? Okay.
We have 15 minutes.
All right, so I'll give you 3 minutes. So our time together has come to a close. I would love to stick around. If anybody wants to stick around and chat and talk more, that would be great. But perhaps could we get like a rapid fire, maybe 3 to 5 things that you learned about corrective feedback today that will help you? Yes?
It's bilateral.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you can't just sort of go in and you indicated that if you're just doing a one-way delivery,
Mm-hmm.
saying you fouled up and here's and fix it, that's not likely to be a very productive
Right.
conversation.
Yep, that's right. So good feedback is a conversation, it's not a speech. Okay. Anything else?
The leader's use of the word curious. I'm curious about
Okay.
what happened.
Okay. That invitation, the non-judgmental, so kind of getting to the, it's not, this unilateral thing, right? So if you need to get to a real solution, you need to get their perspective and you need them to open up. And if you say, what's wrong with you? That's not going to get the answer you want, but I'm curious to hear your perspective might get you the information you need. Anything else?
The leader's use of the word I appreciate.
Okay. Good, good. Excellent. So hopefully what you are taking away from this is the biggest picture thing, that giving corrective feedback doesn't have to be dreaded. It's something that you can embrace as a leader, realizing that it's your opportunity to help somebody grow. And you are giving them an opportunity and feedback that they need to build their competence and contribution, to build their opportunities to recognize in themselves their own worth. And so this really is a gift to them. And with that kind of perspective, I think that you will be well on your way to deeply respectful feedback. Yes?
My question is, the model here I think is quite thoughtful, but it does imply that there is a status difference between the two players. So superior in the organization. When you have peers.
So thank you for that segue. I did not pay you for this, but on the way out, there are copies of the scenarios that were in your packet today, plus 2 additional scenarios that you can practice, one with lateral feedback and one with upward feedback. So additional challenges for you.
What I appreciated, just an additional comment on these scenarios, is the person getting the feedback had descriptions of like they're pissed or they're feeling rejected, blah, blah, blah. But based on this approach, that didn't really come out for them. They didn't need to go there.
Right.
Because of this approach.
Right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.